Okay. Okay, so let us continue from the next paragraph. The fundamental role which these two operations play in language was clearly realized by Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay. So, what two operations? Selection and combination. Yet, from the two varieties of combination, that is concurrence and concatenation, it was only the latter means concatenation, the temporal sequence which was recognized by the Geneva linguist. Okay, so when we talked about combination, right, and we talked about combining different elements together, uh, we talked about two aspects of it. One is concurrence. Concurrence is the occurrence of various elements at the same time. Okay, so suppose you are you are selecting a particular sound. So while you are selecting that sound, you have to select a lot of qualities of that sound at the same time. You have to select whether it is a plosive, whether it is a bilabial, whether it is a voiced or a consonant or a vowel. Like this, you have to make many different choices, and these choices are all going to be expressed at the same time. While expressing that single sound, p or t or k or whatever. So that existence of many different properties in a chosen element is called concurrence, right? And the second aspect is concatenation. That is, you string these chosen elements together in order to express a single unit. Okay. For example, we choose a lot of sounds, we string them together, we concatenate them so that we can express a single word. So both concurrence and concatenation are two sides of the same process. But Saussure actually realized the importance only of concatenation. He did not pay much attention to concurrence. Okay. So despite his insight into the phoneme as a set of concurrent distinctive features. Okay. So the phoneme is a set of concurrent distinctive features. Each phoneme, each sound is actually a a phenomena which exhibits a lot of different properties existing at the same time. Okay. So despite knowing this, what does Saussure do? Saussure succumbed to the traditional belief in the linear character of language. So he understood language only as some linear process. That is, uh, you know, um, a process in which things happen one after the other. Right. So one word is pronounced, and then another word is pronounced, and then the next one, like that. So that was Saussure's idea of language as a linear process, something that happens one after the other. He did not really take into consideration that several things might happen at the same time. Okay, so concurrence was ignored. Okay, in order to delimit the two modes of arrangement which we have described as combination and selection, Ferdinand de Saussure states that the former is in presentia. It is based on two or several terms jointly present in an actual series, whereas the latter connects terms in absentia as members of a virtual mnemonic series. Okay, so when it comes to combination and selection, according to Ferdinand Saussure, combination is in presentia. Okay. So let us say we take a sentence, right? A sentence is actually a combination of words according to various grammatical rules. When we read a sentence, we can understand the elements that are put into it, right? It is present right in front of us. We understand that. Okay, let us take an example sentence. My name is Aravind, right? So if you take a sentence like that, we understand the various words that have been used in order to that have been combined together to make that sentence. My name is Aravind. So we have four words that have been combined together. Okay. So combination is something which is apparent to us. We can just look at a sentence and we can understand what all elements have been chosen, what all elements have been put together into a particular order. But what about selection? And just by looking at a sentence, it is not possible for us to know what were the choices that the speaker made in order to arrive at this sentence. Okay. So suppose before I set the sentence, my name is Arvind. I was thinking of saying it in a different way. I was thinking of saying maybe, my name is, my real name is Arvind, or the name that I use in my official records is Arvind. Suppose this was the thing that I wanted to say initially, but then during the process of articulating, because of the choices that I made, the final utterance, the final statement was, my name is Arvind. So by just looking at the final utterance, it is not possible for us to go back and infer all the choices that the speaker made before that utterance was made. So that is why the selection process is actually hidden from us. Right. While the process is going on in the speaker's mind, it is not possible for us to know how that selection was made. So suppose, let us take another example. Suppose I am describing a garden, okay, and the sentence that I am using to describe this garden is, this garden is such a pleasant one. Okay, so this is a sentence that I am saying. Okay, I'll just write it down. This garden is such a pleasant one. So this is the sentence that I finally said. But in my mind, before I said this sentence, there was a process of selection involved. Okay. So first of all, let us take the word garden. How did I arrive at the word garden? Instead of using the word garden, I could have used this ground, or this lawn, or this park. Okay. So the word garden was chosen from a series of words. There was a whole a collection of words which were available to me, right, in my mind. And from those whole collection of words that were available to me, I chose the word garden. Right. Similarly, what about the word pleasant? So instead of saying pleasant, I could have said beautiful, or calm, or pleasing. Right. I could have chosen any of those words. Right. So that selection process, the process by which the mind selects a particular word, that is something which is not visible to the final hearer of that sentence, the person who hears it. Okay. So that is why Saussure says the selection process, the process of selecting a particular word, happens in absentia. Okay. So it happens in absentia. As members of a virtual mnemonic series. What is the meaning of this virtual mnemonic series? That is a series of possibilities, a series of words that could have occurred in a particular position in a sentence. So this word garden is actually a member of a virtual mnemonic series that is in my mind. Okay. So that mnemonic series will consist of a number of words. Say, let us say, it contained the words lawn, ground, then garden itself was there, then park, location, yeah, this is something like that. Okay, so like this, a number of words were present in my mind, and from these, the one that I selected was garden. Okay. So the way garden is selected is from this virtual series. This is not known to the reader. This series of words will not be visible to the reader or the hearer of the sentence. Okay. Similarly, what about pleasant? Pleasant can also be a part of another virtual mnemonic series. Pleasant. Pleasant, beautiful, calming, pleasing, captivating, etc. So among all of these terms, I finally chose the word pleasant. Right? So this is a this is a virtual selection process that happens in the mind of the speaker. Okay. Okay. So that is to say, selection and correspondingly substitution deals with entities conjoined in the code, but not in the given message. Okay. So these entities, lawn, ground, garden, park, location, etc., these are all connected together somehow in the code. What is the code? The code is language. Okay. So in the language that I am using, these words are all somehow connected together. Why? Because all of them can potentially, uh, you know, potentially be located in this position. Okay. So all of these words, lawn, ground, garden, park, location, etc., all of them can potentially occupy the place where this word garden is now occupying. So they are all connected together in language. The addressee is a hearer. The addressee perceives that the given utterance is a combination of the constituent parts, that is sentences, words, phonemes, etc., selected from the repository of all possible constituent parts. Okay. So the hearer understands that the particular word that he or she is hearing has been selected by the speaker from all the words that are available in the language, right, in the code. The constituents of a context are in a state of contiguity. Contiguity simply means continuity. While in a substitution, set signs are linked by various degrees of similarity, which fluctuate between the equivalence of synonyms and the common core of antonyms. Okay, so what is the meaning of this sentence? That is, in a particular context, that is, if you look at a sentence, this is an example, this is a sentence. Okay, this is a context. What is a context? A context is a frame, right? So if we imagine this sentence as a frame, then each word in this sentence is connected to the other words in the sentence because of contiguity, right? Because if we remove one word from the sentence, right, let us say if we remove the word pleasant, right, then the sentence would have a different meaning. Maybe it will lose all its meaning, right? So contiguity or continuity, that is what relates all the words in a particular context. At the same time, each word in this sentence, it is also related to this virtual, this mnemonic series of words which exist in the language, right? So if we imagine, this kind of a connection in a sentence, the contiguity as a horizontal connection, right? So the word garden is horizontally connected to this is such a pleasant one. Right. The word garden is horizontally connected to all these words because it is located in the same context. At the same time, the word garden is vertically connected. It is vertically connected to all these other words: lawn, ground, garden, park, location, etc. So, contiguity Right. Contiguity is a vertical connection. Contiguity is a horizontal connection between words in a given context. It can be just words. It can also be sounds. Okay. Let us take an example of sounds being connected horizontally and vertically. For that, let us take a single word like lawn, Lawn. Right. So if you look at the word lawn, I'll just write it here. Lawn. So lawn is a connection. It's a context in which the sound l, a, and n. Like n is the dark, the dark sound n. Okay. So anyway, it is a combination of these sounds, right? And la is horizontally connected to the other sounds in this word because it all exists in the same context. But at the same time, instead of la, we could have substituted other sounds like on or son or what other. Um, okay, let's just say these two sounds, the per sound and the sir sound. So because per or sir could have occupied this position where la is now occupying, we can say that la was connected virtually to per and sir. Okay. So this vertical connection is the connection which is involved in the selection process, and the horizontal connection is the connection which is involved in the combination process. Okay. So for every linguistic unit, whether it is a word, whether it is a sentence, whether it is a discourse, we can imagine both a horizontal connection, that is contiguity, as well as a vertical connection, which is substitution. So I hope that idea is okay. Okay. So the constituents of a context are in a status of contiguity, while in a substitution set, signs are linked by various degrees of similarity, which fluctuate between the equivalence of synonyms and the common core of antonyms. Okay. So if you are looking at a sentence, this garden, the word garden is connected to synonyms. Okay, lawn, ground, park, location, etc. can be interpreted as some sort of synonyms, some sort of words which are connected with the same kind of meaning. All right. The connection can also be an opposition of meaning. Okay. For example, if you take the word such as pleasant, the word pleasant is also related to words like unpleasant, unhappy, displeasing, etc. Right. So the connection can be a synonymous connection, that is the connection between words which share the same meaning, or it can be the connection between words which oppose meaning, the opposite meaning. Right. Both of these are connections. Okay. So a word is connected not only to other words which share the same meaning that it has, it is also connected to words which oppose the meaning that it conveys. Okay. So that is the meaning of this point. So these two operations provide each linguistic sign with two sets of interpretants. To utilize the effective concept introduced by Charles Sanders Peirce, there are two references which serve to interpret the sign. One to the code and the other to the context. Okay, so you can just understand this as, in order to understand any linguistic sign, we need to look at the connection of that particular sign to its context as well as to its code. When we understand the relationship between the sign and its context, we are looking at the way it is combined together, the combination. And when we look at the relationship between a sign and the code, we are looking at how it has been selected. Okay. So selection, combination. These are the two aspects that we are talking about.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Sir, can you just explain what you told right now once again? This line,
Which one? This line, this particular line.
the current line.
Yeah, I'll read it once again. Okay. Where does it begin? Yeah. So these two operations provide each linguistic sign with two sets of interpretants. That is, two ways of interpreting it, two ways of understanding it. So every linguistic sign contains two ways through which we can understand it. Okay. Okay, let us leave this much and continue from here. There are two references which serve to interpret the sign, one to the code and the other to the context. Okay, so when we take any sign, so in this particular sentence, the word garden is a sign. Okay, so in order to understand the word garden, we can use two different kinds of interpretations. We can interpret garden using its particular location in this context, in this sentence. Why is the word garden occupying this place in this sentence? Okay. So that is one interpretation. The second interpretation is asking the question, why was the garden selected from this list of related terms in the language? Why did the speaker select garden from among lawn, ground, park, location, garden, etc.? Okay. So these are the two questions that we can ask for any sign. One is related to the context in which it is located, and the other one is related to its position in the language itself, in the code. Okay. So there are two references which serve to interpret the sign, one which is linked to the code and the other to the context, whether coded or free. And in each of these ways, the sign is related to another set of linguistic signs through an alternation in the former case and through an alignment in the latter. Okay. So each sign is related to another set of signs. To go back to our example, each sign, this sign called garden, is related to another set of signs. It can either be this set or this set. One is through the process of alternation. Alternation is, there are many alternatives here. Why was the word garden selected from all these alternatives? So that is one kind of relation, right? Why did we select garden from all these alternatives? The other relation is that of combination. Why did we combine the word garden with these other set of words? Okay. So every sign in a given, language, right? Whether when it is being used by some speaker, it is related to two other sets of signs, one in the particular context and one in the code. Okay. Okay. So the term that Jacobson is using is alternation. Alternation is the relationship between a sign and the code. And alignment is the relationship between the sign and the context. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So a given significative unit, a given unit which has a meaning, significative means expressing some meaning, may be replaced by other more explicit signs of the same code. That is, in any given sentence, one particular word can be replaced by a lot of other words which carry various other shades of meaning. It can be the same meaning, it can be the opposite meaning, whatever. Right? So the important thing is that replacement is possible. We can replace one particular sign with some other sign, whereby its general meaning is revealed, while its contextual meaning is determined by its connection with other signs within the same sequence. Okay, so by replacing one particular sign in a sentence, in a context, with other signs, we can understand the general meaning of that sign. Okay, so what is an example of that? So let us say we have a sentence like a rose is a flower. Okay, let us take a sentence like that. A rose is a flower. So this is a sentence that we are looking at. If we take the word rose, what are the other kinds of signs that can be used to replace this word rose? So we can say, instead of rose, we can say a jasmine is a flower. Uh, what? Hibiscus, a flower. Can you name one more flower? Somebody? Okay, a sunflower is a flower. Okay. So this particular word can be replaced by any of these other words: jasmine, hibiscus, sunflower, etc. You can think of any number of flowers, daffodil or daisy or whatever. Right? So by looking at the other words that can replace this word, the general meaning of this word is becoming clearer. Okay. So we understand that because jasmine, hibiscus, sunflower, daisy, daffodil, etc. can occupy the same position in this particular context as rose, we understand that the meaning of the word rose is somehow related to the meaning of jasmine, hibiscus, sunflower, etc. Right. So the general meaning of the sign rose becomes more clear when we look at the other signs that can replace it within a given context. Okay. So what is the given context? The given context is a dash is a flower. This is the context. So within this context, we can say that the word rose can be replaced by any of these other signs, Therefore, the relationship between this sign and these other signs become apparent. We understand that there is the relationship. And through that relationship, we understand the general meaning of the word rose. Okay. So why do we have to go through this method in order to understand the meaning of the word rose? That is again going back to Saussure's theory of arbitrariness. Language is simply an arbitrary system of interconnected terms, right? Interconnected signs. The word rose and the actual object doesn't have any real connection, right? There is no reason why there should be any connection between the sign rose and the actual plant. The only way we can understand that this particular sign has a meaning is because we relate it to other signs like jasmine, hibiscus, sunflower, etc. That is the way we understand that this particular word rose has a certain significance. Okay, so that is the meaning of the sentence. Let's look at the sentence once again. A given significative unit, let us say rose, may be replaced by other more explicit signs of the same code. For example, jasmine, hibiscus, sunflower, etc. Whereby its general meaning is revealed. Whereby the general meaning of rose is revealed. While its contextual meaning is determined by its connection with the other signs within the same sequence. So what is the contextual meaning of the word rose? The contextual meaning can be understood by looking in the relationship of this particular sign with the other signs in this context, in this sentence. Okay. So for that, let us take another example. Let us say um, the the Eiffel Tower. Okay. The Eiffel Tower is a very tall building. Okay, suppose this is our sentence. How do you understand, the meaning of the sign Eiffel Tower? What we are saying is that this particular sign, whatever this signifies, Eiffel Tower, that particular sign refers to something which has the property of being tall, and it also has the property of being a building. Okay. So we understand the contextual meaning of this particular sign by looking at what other signs it is connected to in this context. Okay. So this particular sign, Eiffel Tower, is connected to words such as very. Very means it is conveying an extreme degree. So we understand that this particular sign, Eiffel Tower, represents something which is extreme. It has some characteristics of extremeness. Right? Then it has some characteristic of being tall. It has some characteristic of being a building. So looking at the other signs which are used in this particular context, we can understand the contextual meaning of this particular sign. So both contextual meaning as well as the meaning of this sign in relation to other signs in the code have to be understood while reading any sort of linguistic unit, any sort of linguistic expression. Okay. Okay. The constituents of any message are necessarily linked with the code by an internal relation and with the message by an external relation. Okay, so internal relation refers to the process of alternation, and external relation refers to the process of alignment. Language in its various aspects deals with both modes of relation. Whether messages are exchanged or communication proceeds unilaterally from the addresser to the addressee, there must be some kind of contiguity between the participants of any speech event to assure the transmission of the message. The separation in space and often in time between two individuals, the addresser and the addressee, is bridged by an internal relation. There must be a certain equivalence between the symbols used by the addresser and those known and interpreted by the addressee. Without such an equivalence, the message is fruitless. Even when it reaches the receiver, it does not affect him. Okay. So this last part is about how communication is made possible. Right? When two people communicate, or when there is some sort of an exchange of a message between a sender and a recipient, right? There should be some contiguity between the participants. What does this contiguity mean? Contiguity means some sort of a continuation, some sort of a connection. Okay. And where does this connection come from? It comes from, first of all, it can be an external connection. Maybe we are both located in the same room, and we are talking with each other, and therefore there is a connection, right? Both the sender and the receiver are present at the same time and place. So that is an external connection. What if the sender and the receiver are separated by time and space? Suppose the sender is recording, a message, and this recording is being listened to after many years in a different place, by the hearer. In such a case, the relationship between them, that is provided, the contiguity which is necessary for the message to be interpreted is provided by the language itself. Right? If the speaker and the hearer, if the sender and the receiver are using the same code, the same language, then that common element, that contiguity, assures the effectiveness of the communication. So if there is some break in this contiguity, if for instance, maybe due to some change in the language, or maybe the language has gone extinct, in that case, there is no communication possible. Suppose we as an example, let us say we are going into one of the ancient pyramids in Egypt. None of us speak Egyptian. We don't understand the meaning of the symbols that are carved on the pyramid walls. So while we are walking through the pyramid, we can just look at the walls. We can see the symbols, but these symbols do not have any effect on us. That is because the contiguity, the continuousness between the sender and the receiver has been lost. Right? We don't, we don't find any sort of connection. The connection has been severed. Okay. So in order for the communication to happen, there must be some contiguity between the parts. So this is a very, it's a very common sense idea. Unless both of us speak the same language, it is not possible for us to understand each other. Right. Now we come to the next section of this essay, where Jacobson is going to talk about one particular kind of aphasia. Right. One particular kind of aphasia, which is called the similarity disorder. So in this similarity disorder, one of the one of the processes which is involved in making the science meaningful, that is affected. And because of this this problem, it is not possible for communication to proceed normally. Okay. So let us read this and find out which of the process, whether it is combination or selection, which of the ones is affected. Just by looking at the name, we can understand to some extent. Similarity means choosing between similar terms. So the process of selection, that is what is going to be affected in this kind of a disorder. So if you suffer from this sort of a language defect, your process of choosing between similar terms will be affected. So suppose you see a tree. Suppose you are seeing a mango tree, but you will not be able to select between mango, jackfruit, coconut, some other tree. So you will not be able to express the specific meaning of what you are trying to tell somebody. Why? Because the process of selecting from that list of related terms in the code, that has been lost. Okay, let us read this. It is clear that speech disturbances may affect in various degrees the individual's capacity for combination and selection of linguistic units. Okay. And indeed, the question of which of these operations is chiefly impaired proves to be of far-reaching significance in describing, analyzing, and classifying the diverse forms of aphasia. So there are many different kinds of speech disorders. One important step in understanding, classifying this kind of speech disorders is trying to find out which process is affected. Is it the combination process or is it the selection process? Okay. This dichotomy is perhaps even more suggestive than the classical distinction between emissive and receptive aphasia. Okay, so earlier, before before Roman Jakobson's time, aphasia was merely it was mainly divided into two kinds. That is receptive aphasia and emissive aphasia. Emissive aphasia means you are not able to produce speech. Receptive aphasia means you are not able to understand speech. Okay. That is, the process of production is affected in emissive aphasia. The process of reception is affected in receptive aphasia. This was the kind of classification that used to be there. But due to the due to the insights provided by Jacobson and others, this was replaced by looking at whether the aphasia affects the combination process or the selection process. Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's look at the next paragraph. Head attempted to classify cases of aphasia into definite groups, and to each of these varieties he assigned a name chosen to signify the most salient defect in the management and comprehension of words and phrases. Following this device, we distinguish two basic types of aphasia, depending on whether the major deficiency lies in selection and substitution, with the relative stability of combination and contexture, or conversely, in combination contexture with the relative retention of normal selection and substitution. Okay, so there are two kinds of aphasia mainly according to Head. Head is a researcher. I don't know his full name. Maybe it is given in the at the end of the essay. We'll find out. Anyway, he classified aphasia into two categories. One is the kind of aphasia in which selection and substitution are affected. The other is the category in which combination and contexture are affected. In outlining these two opposite patterns of aphasia, I shall utilize mainly Goldstein's data. For aphasics of the first type, okay, the first type of aphasia is selection deficiency. Okay. For aphasics of the first type, the context is indispensable and is the indispensable and decisive factor. When presented with scraps of words or sentences, such as a patient readily, such a patient readily completes them. Okay, his speech is merely reactive. So in such a patient, if you supply the context of the sentence to that patient, the patient will be able to complete the sentence. Okay. So the context is very easily understood. There is no problem with the horizontal connection between the signs. The horizontal connection is okay, but such a patient will not be able to use the vertical connection. The vertical connection will be damaged. Right, the selection process is damaged. Okay. So when presented with scraps of words or sentences, such a patient readily completes them. Okay. So if if we give such a patient, a questionnaire to complete. Okay. Suppose we are giving such a patient fill in the blanks question, something like my name slash. If such a question is given to a patient, the patient will readily say, that the word missing is yes, my name is Aravind. Right, something like that. So based on the context, the patient is able to understand what is missing. They can complete sentences. The same process can be used in words. Suppose we give such a such a patient another exercise in which they have to complete this question. Now complete the following. Suppose this question is given. then the patient will readily complete it as machine. MACHIN. H is the missing element. So when the context is given, the patient is clearly able to understand what is missing. Okay. So he easily carries on conversation, but has difficulties in starting a dialogue. So such a patient is able to react. Okay. So when somebody asks something, the patient is able to reply, because through the process of asking that patient something, you have already supplied the context. You have given the context within which that answer is relevant. So once the patient gets the context, the patient is okay, right? But if the patient has to undergo this process of selection first, if the patient wants to select something, then it is not possible for the patient to talk. Okay. Yeah, so he has difficulties in starting a dialogue. He is able to reply to a real or imaginary addresser when he is or imagines himself to be the addressee of the message. So he can be somebody who replies. It is particularly hard for him to perform or even to understand such a close discourse as the monologue. Okay, so such a person will not be able to produce a monologue. So what happens in a monologue? If I am speaking a monologue, then I have to do the entire process of selecting and combination. I have to select what I want to say. I have to go to my mind. I have to select the individual sounds, individual words, everything. Whatever ideas I want to say, I have to select them. And then I will combine them and I will express myself. So this process of selecting cannot work in similarity disorder. Okay. So the more his utterances are dependent on the context, the better he copes with his verbal task. He feels unable to utter a sentence which responds neither to the cue of his interlocutor nor to the actual situation. The sentence, "it rains," cannot be produced unless the utterer sees that it is actually raining. Okay. So such a patient will have to be provided with some real context for the patient to use language. Without some context, they cannot imagine or imaginatively produce the context required for speech. So unless they see that it is raining or somebody talks about rain, they will not be able to produce the phrase "it rains." Okay. The deeper the utterance is embedded in a verbal or non-verbalized context, the higher are the chances of its successful performance by this class of patients. Likewise, the more a word is dependent on the other words of the same sentence, and the more it refers to the syntactical context. Syntactical is the grammatical, right? The less it is affected by speech disturbance. Okay. Therefore, words syntactically subordinated by grammatical agreement or government are more tenacious. Tenacious means stronger. So grammatical words that are required to complete the grammatical sense of a sentence, those words can be easily uttered by such a patient. Why? Because grammatical words do not really carry meaning on their own. They carry meaning because of their relation with other words in a context. So grammatical words are very easily understood and reproduced by such a patient. Okay. Therefore, words syntactically subordinated by grammatical agreement or government are more tenacious, whereas the main subordinating agent of the sentence, namely the subject, tends to be omitted. Okay, so the main, the subject of the sentence, the subject is the important performer of a sentence. Right? In order to determine the subject of a sentence, somebody has to, fix that subject. And fixing a subject involves a process of selection. So if there's a sentence like, you know, what is it? Something like Arun needs to write an exam. Arun needs to write an exam. Suppose this is a sentence. Suppose if I want to say the sentence, and I in the sentence, who is the subject? The subject is Arun. Arun needs to write this exam. So if I am a patient suffering from similarity disorder, it will not be possible for me to select Arun, right? Because in my mind, the process of selecting Arun from all the other alternatives, Arun from other alternatives such as Ravi, Sangeeta, Ashwin, Sunil, etc. There are many other possibilities which can exist in the same place as Arun, right? But selecting Arun is not possible for me because my selection function is not working properly, right? But if it is just a grammatical word, okay, suppose the sentence is something like, this is a table. So if such a sentence is to be uttered by me, then I won't have any trouble saying the words, is and a. Okay, because is and a, both of these words are grammatical words. They have a meaning because their meaning is very apparent in the context of the sentence, right? So grammatical words can be easily understood and produced, but words that occupy the subject position, where there is some sort of a selection involved, such words cannot be produced. Okay. Okay, so I hope that idea is clear. Yeah, we have still not reached the place where Roman Jakobson is going to tell us about the role of these two processes in language. That is a bit further ahead. But let me see if we can we can cover that in the next class. I don't know whether we'll get a next class or not. But if we don't get a next class, don't worry. I will provide you with some recording or some sort of a note which makes this a little more clear. I already have a sort of a presentation with me, which clarifies some of these ideas. So maybe I'll share this presentation with you, and you can take a look at this presentation. It will help you to understand some of these ideas in a better way. But anyway, we'll cover this. Meanwhile, keep looking at all the other essays that we have already covered. Keep reading them. Whenever you come across some idea that is difficult for you to understand, keep a note of it and send it to me whenever you get the time. Okay, and I will clarify it for you. Okay. So we will stop here for today, and we'll meet later. Tomorrow we have the exam. Um, I will share the questions on Moodle, and I will let you know on the WhatsApp group. Okay. If you have any other doubts or anything that you want to ask me, please do. Okay, no questions, no clarifications necessary at this time. Okay then, shall we stop for today?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.